Welcome back to Programming with Qt Widgets. In this episode, we will look at the CMake setup around internationalization. If you think that you can just watch this very short video and learn everything about internationalization, I'm afraid you're wrong. You better head to the previous episode because that's where the foundation of everything is built. Okay, I know you're a busy being, so let me just give you the highlight of the previous episode. And it's likely been a few months since you watched that episode. So somewhere in your code, likely by doing absolutely nothing because you're using Qt Designer, you will mark up the strings that need to be translated. Then a tool will be run on your source code called L-update, which extracts all those strings and put them into a file with the extension TS. Another tool is run that's called L-release that will convert that file into a file with extension .qm, one for every language, mind you. And in between, linguist will be executed by those that are actually doing the translation. So what is the key thing here is extracting with L-update and converting with L-release and marking which languages to translate to. That's the thing for CMake to handle. And one more thing, also compiling in the translations of Qt itself. So let's get started. If you go to this URL or something similar by just Googling for, say, Qt add translations, then you'll get to a page that looks somewhat like this. And that was, for me at least, somewhat confusing. Which of those tools am I supposed to use? But first of all, you can see two here that are striped through. That's because if you click on those, it'll say, ooh, you shouldn't be using those anymore. And I forgot. Everything I'm telling you in this episode requires at least Qt 6.7, possibly even .2. So I'm really at the edge of things, at least for the time recording. When you're watching this in 2035, yeah, that was an old version. But hey, if you need to support one of the older versions, you likely want to either run these two directly, or you look at your Qt add translations and see what it supports, because it was introduced in Qt 6.2, I believe, and then updated in 6.7. And worst case, you'll go down and use this one. If you're using Qt 5, I think it's even possible, but the tools might look somewhat different there. Anyway, the basics is the same. What I need to do is to make sure that L-update is executed from time to time, actually only when I ask for it. I'll get back to that. And that L-release is executed whenever the TS file is newer than the QM file. And we have these two functions in CMake here, which are doing the groundwork. But if you look at the documentation for Qt add translation, the S here, not this one, but this one down here, then you'll notice that it says that it's a wrapper around these two for the most common cases. Qt collect translation source targets. I didn't entirely understand it myself, and this is not programming with CMake, mind you, but what it sounds like is if you do not want your unit test to be marked for translations, then you can do stuff with this one to more specifically point CMake to where to find the CPP and header files that has translation markers in them. So here is the page with documentation of Qt add translations. And what you can see, first of all, you need to have this linguist tools in your find package. I'll show you a setup that works for me, at least for the simple example I have in a second. So I'll get back to that. What you'll notice here is that since Qt 6.7, you have all these set up here, and you can just looking over it, L-update options and L-release options and so on. And also, if you're on Qt 6 6.2 or later, but earlier than 6.7, then it looks like this instead, with a fewer options than what you had up there. And if you have versionless commands, then it's called Qt 6 add translations. That's if you try to support both Qt 5 and Qt 6 with the same code base. Something we did earlier on, but if you're on Qt 6, then it has been quite a few years already that Qt 6 has been out, so supporting both code bases is less common these days, but relatively easy to do with Qt Widgets nevertheless. If I scroll down a bit further, then that's just this one here that I want to show you. That's another way of doing it. This is relatively new in Qt 6.7, I think, that you can now write Qt standard project setup and ING blah blah blah, and just the languages here. I'll show you a slightly more verbose version of doing it. So there's different options. Figure out which one works the best for you. So let's have a look at what do you need to add to your CMake files for translation. As I said, your find package line already looks like core, GUI, whatever else you need from Qt, networking, I don't know. And then add linguist tool, which will make sure that the functions for CMake here are added. And here is the Qt add translations. And it's this target here, X text editor CMake. That's the name of the target for the binary that it will be connected to. The TS files, these are the files that I'm interested in getting extracted to from my sources. So there's Danish, French, and gibberish, as we saw in the previous episode. And here is the first catch. These files will not be generated automatically. They will not, if you just run Ninja or Make or click in the right places in Qt, come out. And why is that? Well, because you really only want them at a very specific time, namely when you have decided that it's time for release 215.7.8 or whatever version number you're going to put out. That's when you want the translation files to be generated, so you can send them to Germany, to Denmark, to France, to wherever your translators are sitting. They don't want to do the translation all the time, because that's just going to be, they'll be translating a string and you'll be deleting that string tomorrow, and then they'll be like, why did I even want to translate that string? So only on release time. And that's when you will be running something like Make or Ninja or whatever your build system is. And there is a target called Update Translations. The second problem that you have in here is that once you have all this set up, the QM files are actually built or put into your build directory. In the previous episode, we saw with CMake that they were put into my source directory, which was a problem for me back then. But equally bad is that they are in your build directory, because what you want is to not ship those files separately. You want them to be compiled into your binary, and the Qt add translations fortunately set up so they actually goes into your binary at this path :I18N. And one trick that is worthwhile to note is that when you are sitting here and something isn't working, your Qt translator load will just say, I didn't find it, sorry. What can be useful for you then is to actually start GammaRay and look into a binary, because GammaRay has this facility of showing you the resources compiled into the binary. And then you can see that, oh yeah, it was missing something there. If you're as old as me, you'll remember how Superman could cut steel with his eyes and see through walls. I cannot give you the power of cutting steel with your eyes, but GammaRay, a tool by KDAB, can let you see through the walls, or rather look into the binaries of your Qt application. It's the go-to tool for debugging Qt applications. So that was your own translations, but we also have the translations of Qt itself. Remember the About Qt in the help menu? It's a whole wall of text that obviously should be translated too. And to do so, I came up with this piece of code here with a bit of help from friends and whatnot, because I'm not a CMake guru. Mind you, I'm not even a really good user, unfortunately. But what it says here is that first line here, I set just a variable because I found that there was this CMake variable called Q6 that told me a directory where the binary of CMake, I believe, was in. And I found that in ... there was a translations directory where the translation of Qt itself were located. I didn't want to specify that path myself, because if I changed Qt version, it should be changing the directory here too. There is a setup in KDE. I'll give you a link to it below in the comments for another way of doing this. I had a coworker look at it and he said, like, would you let that through in a code review? And I was like, yeah, hard-coded 3 levels, CDing up is likely not a very nice way. So there is another way where CMake can run QMake to inquire that for a bunch of different paths. So have a look at that link below. Anyway, this will get me to the directory where the translation's in. I will gulp for all the QM files in there. I checked out with the current release of Qt, it was like 5 megabytes. So if that is too much, if you're going for a really tight embedded target, you're likely not here. You'll be watching the QML videos. But if 5 megabytes for some reason is too much for you, then you'll have to figure out how to run glop to get exactly those that you need out. And then here comes the Qt add resources again. No, not again. This time I am adding resources. I was confusing myself with Qt add translations. No, I'm adding a resource. And usually resources, you do that by right-clicking inside of Qt Creator to add the resource, or you will add a resource definition file, but you can actually add resources using this macro here. What I'm saying is that this resource is called Qt translations, and the prefix is /translations. That's what I will get to in my source code. I can write : /translation/ and then the QM files that I have up there. Base, that means that this one will have a lot of directories in it. So cut away all these translations. It could be that it had, say, I could have had the base be 1 level up, and then I would get the translation right away from there. But anyway, and then the files are these files that I have up here. And with all of that in place, let's see the actual end result. My CMake file, let's start there. Remember the linguist tool up there? This is just the usual setup. And this whole file actually came from running CMake-project, which is a tool in KDE Toolbox that will generate you a default CMake setup. You didn't know about that one? Well, you're welcome. Google for it, or there's a link below. These are my my files, including the resource files here. The target linked library, that's the binary that comes out here. There we are. And it has this setup, usual setup. We've seen it multiple times. Here's my Qt add translation to this target here. These are the files to be translated. And this is the code we just discussed for translating Qt itself. And now, if I run it, I'll need to make sure that the language is set up properly. I can do that from within here if I want to. I can go to my build. I can use the build environment. Oh, I need to go to run here. Environment, details, language equal to fr, and add that. And now when I run my binary, you'll see that it's speaking French to me, at least I think it does. And that's from running. Oh, I needed to run it again, because I also need to show you that apropos de Qt is speaking French to me, I just saw Qt license under, so why is this not translated? C'est programme, yeah, I'm not gonna, some of it is translated. I don't know why they decided not to translate the whole thing. Maybe whoever translated it didn't get it right. I don't know, but at least it found the translation files for Qt itself. And that would be something like if you have a Qfont dialog, for example, or if you have some of the other dialogues in Qt with some actual text on, those would be translated to the language. And finally, before I forget about it, let's go out here and just find our editor.cpp and do this one here again. tr welcome world. That's a different version of hello world. And what you'll notice is that if I go and find my and run linguist, I always want linguist to have a Q instead of a G. I don't know. Linguist, editor underscore fr.ts. You'll notice it doesn't say hello world anywhere or welcome world anywhere in here, even though I did just run build and do it 3-4 times, but still it doesn't show up in here. That's because I need to go to my build directory, and for me it's called Ninja, and update translations. And now if I go back and run linguist, you'll notice that it says welcome world. Now I need to translate that into French, which you're not going to see me do. I'm sorry. If you just managed to get here by Googling and haven't watched any of the other episodes, here's some good news for you. We have 46 episodes of programming with Qt Widgets out already. And in the next few days, there's going to be another few one. Maybe they're already out when you're watching this. There's a link below to the playlist for programming with Qt Widgets. There's a link below also to another playlist for Qt Widgets and more, where I have more than 100 episodes of Qt Widget related issues that might be very interesting to you. And if you got here because you are a QML developer and you wanted to know about this, you will say, oh man, all of this is wasted. Well, actually everything that you saw in here works exactly the same in QML. It is how you mark up the files in QML itself that is different, but not all that much different. In C++, we'll write the function tr. In Qt, I believe it's called qstr, but that's about it. That's it for this episode of Programming with Qt Widgets. In the next episode, I will talk about parameterized text and plural handling. That is, do not concatenate strings together because that will screw up your translators. And do not have dialogues that says opened one file, because that's just bad English. Until next time, have a great time.